Well, listen, speaking of big budget films here, this one being around 135, 140 reportedly. I think that may be before marketing, but not quite sure. I want
Pretty
to
much that's always before. That was. Let me look. Is that true that this was under 150?
That's what I'm seeing here.
Because I'm constantly
Yeah, very had a
fascinated.
very reasonable budget is what's being reported.
I don't know that like because it looks good. It doesn't look bad. It looks believable. It fits the movie
Agreed.
that you're watching. It's extraordinarily large in scale. So that I mean that I've had this conversation with a zillion people about a zillion different things about what is going on with a bunch of these Hollywood budgets. If that's
Uh-huh.
accurate, this is another one of these ones like what is Warner Brothers doing that they're making this movie for 135, they're making Dune for under 200 million? Like Disney, do you need to like send some people over to learn? Warner Brothers, they need to learn from everyone else about art, artistic integrity and not shelving movies, but at least they know how to make a movie for a reasonable budget.
And you know what? Oscar winner Cord Jefferson, writer director of American Fiction, also agrees with that. Let's dial back a little bit to the Oscars a couple weeks ago, where in his acceptance speech, he made a plea for mid-budget films, saying, "Try making 10 million dollar movies instead of the $200 million blockbusters." And he later said that this was a plea to acknowledge and recognize that there are so many people out there who want the opportunity that he was given. It's funny here because I was thinking about this today when I was preparing for the podcast with you, and thinking back to the films that I've enjoyed, Dune and Godzilla aside, the past maybe year or so. It's been a lot of the mid budget, the low budget, the indie films. It's a lot more of these straightforward, not bombastic, high expectation films that I think are really hitting with me. And I wonder, Sean, especially thinking, we haven't talked about Marvel and all the turmoil over there and the reshaping that seems to be happening, taking a step back, not throwing out so many films in one year, perhaps being a little bit more budget conscious when it comes to projects. Do you think that the time of this mega blockbuster that we got so used to, the films that are expected to cross $1 billion, do you think that time has passed and that we're back maybe in the cycle, the part of the cycle that is more focused on more accessible films, more mid-budget films?
I hope so. I feel like last year it had to be a wake up call for all the studios. They just had to look at that and go, "Oh, this is almost a parody of ourselves." Like all of us thought if you just throw $250 million at an IP, that it'll instantly print money. And Disney being the one that took probably the most hits about this, but it was everybody. All the big studios put out movies that cost way too much money, and they put out so many of them. If you just stop and think about it, like from the beginning of March until the middle of August, almost every single week there was a high budget franchise film. Just every week, some adaptation that cost a lot of money. And if you just stop and think about that, there aren't enough ticket buyers to justify that, to make all of those movies profitable. And so you're just competing against each other in a way where you can't all win. It guaranteed some of you are going to suffer, and then you just also just exhaust people.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw that last year with so many movies underperforming, where I believe Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 was the only movie with a budget over $200 million that definitively
Correct.
made a profit. There were others that were kind of like at that break even point with Elemental, maybe Little Mermaid, but they're films that all they had to do was have a more reasonable budget, and all of a sudden they make $100 million. But because they spent exorbitantly large amounts of money to create them, they lost so much money. And I look at like A24. I'm not a gigantic A24 fan on a preference level.
Yeah.
There's a lot of their movies that I don't feel are for me. But I love A24 as a studio that's making mid budget, original films. And as of recently, they've started making movies that maybe it's just coincidental they put a couple of them out that happen to be right up my alley. But Iron Claw, right now, I might say that's my number one of last year. I think I previously said Godzilla -1. But either case, those are both movies that aren't a $250 million Hollywood film.
Absolutely.
So Iron Claw, and then coming out in a couple weeks, Civil War, I thought it really worked. And it's another movie that's reasonable budget, and it feels immersive. It feels big, but you believe every shot of the movie in a modest budget. And then likewise, Blumhouse, kind of totally different from A24 in a sense, but also high concept, reasonable budget. Hey, let's give you a shot. You got $10 million. Your movie doesn't need to make $100 million for us to be profitable. And they do these high concept films, and it makes it much easier to market an original film and make a profit on it. And so, like, I see the quote from Cord Jefferson there, and I hear that and I go, right, Hollywood, please start doing this. And you think back to the 90s, like how many movies that it was just commonplace that you'd have these mid-budget action films, these rom-coms that, you know, over half the budget just goes to get Sandra Bullock and the male lead, or Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson or whatever. And that was like the selling point, is you really like them in this type of movie. And you had a lot that was in the middle. And you had these windows where they would kind of trust these up-and-comers to do stuff. And I think even where you see so much of what's like really broken in Hollywood right now is that you have these people that make a small budget indie film that gets great reviews, and then they snatch them up and turn them into basically a McDonald's manager and put them over a Marvel movie. And,
a lot of fast food tonight. A lot of fast food here tonight.
Yeah, that's how it works for me. that's how I roll. But you think like Nia DaCosta does Candyman, and this very distinct movie with a vibe, very distinct aesthetic vibe, directorial flavor, and then she's given this gigantic movie, and she's openly like, "Oh, it's Kevin Feige's film. They did this, they did this," and you're immediately like, "This." There's things that feel like she directed this, but overall, this feels like she was a franchise director. Like she's just a hired gun. And instead of being like, you were successful this thing here, here's something in the middle. You just jump straight over, like, and it's like, that's the journey. Didn't the Daniels get a job doing some stuff for Star Wars or something like that? And you go, you don't have to turn these creative, interesting people into franchise guys. Even right. Adam Wingard, the guy that
absolutely.
I loved You're Next, and then he like somewhere that he's doing these gigantic blockbuster ones. Like I want him to pause and like now do a $30 million horror film where you have the resources to do interesting stuff, but it's not about big stars. It's not about a franchise. It's not about that. It's like do You're Next with more of a budget. Anyway, I'm rambling on there, but I mean, I want the return of the mid-budget film in all genres and all different senses. Or even one final, like you think movies that when we were growing up, like all of these lawyer movies based off John Grisham books.
Absolutely.
You think that things like all the dramas that, like I went to go see in high school and middle school, and those would be big hit films. And now, the Holdovers would have been this big hit film back in 1995, and it comes out now and it makes $10 million, and everyone's like, it's fantastic. Oh, maybe I'll stream it someday. It's bizarre what's going on.
Yeah. Very different. It's, as an aside, you just had me thinking about Adam Wingard and his previous filmography, and Dan Stevens in The Guest, that connection that probably led to him being cast in this film. But you're exactly right. And, we are getting some films this year that are starting to get some buzz that would have been big hits back in the 90s. Think about Tom Hanks and Robin Wright and Robert Zemeckis' Here coming out later this year. It's a Forrest Gump reunion. That in another time would be a huge draw. But you're also looking at right now, we have to look at the fact that rom-coms are making a comeback, and they're on the lower budget scale. You're also seeing horror continue to have success, whether it's indie horror or even things like Scream that are lower budget films, that are doing very well. So it's kind of fascinating here. You know what? I don't know. Thinking from a business point of view, do you want to take the risk on a huge blockbuster where, as you said, last year showed studios that they're not a sure thing anymore, or do you want to take the risk on lower budget projects, more of them, and hopefully get good return? That's then going to allow, as an aside as well, those directors like the Daniels, like Wingard, like whoever, to continue to follow their passion, which brought success to the projects they originally worked on in the first place. It's just kind of fascinating to me that we're in this big budget world, and I do kind of blame Marvel for it a little bit, for the way that things, you know, started back with Iron Man and built up quickly. You know, not to get into it, but we saw that how it moved the goalposts with DC so quickly, where if the movie wasn't making $1 billion, it was a problem. Granted, you know, let's talk Batman versus Superman. It was critically panned, but still made over $800 million, which is a successful film in and of itself.
Same with Amazing Spider-Man 2. Made $800 million, and people are like, this garbage, it only made $800 million, and you're like, these are crazy expectations.
Absolutely crazy expectations, which I'll turn back, Sean, to a conversation you and I just had offline about the Tribeca Film Festival. Yeah. That's where you find a lot of these low budget films, a lot of these indie films that will probably be finding their way through the Neons and A24s and Bleecker Streets of the world, and won't make a ton of money, but will be very well regarded when we get to award season next year.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I went to South by Southwest a couple weeks back, and like what I always hope that I can kind of do with, you know, some of my rankings and the way I do things is like I use Monkey Man, Fall Guy to what does he think about those? And then in the video, hopefully point you towards the $1 million little mini horror film or whatever. It's even like the big concept when I started doing monthly rankings was whenever I would do an individual review for these smaller films, someone doesn't know what it is, so they don't click on it. But then if you package it in this context, they're like, oh, did he like Dune Part 2 or Imaginary more? That's a good question. But okay, no one's asking that. But put it in that video where they're tuning into that, and then sandwiched all within it, I'm like, there's a movie called One Percenter. It's actually a Japanese martial arts film. I saw it at Fantastic Fest last September. It didn't get any promotion, but it's a cool little martial arts film. If you want something a little bit different, it's like Die Hard, a little Fight Club in there, and it's like it has this cool style to it. Check this movie out. If I did a review of 1% Warrior, it would be my worst performing video. But because I'm talking about this other context, it's going to be seen by like 10,000, 15,000 people are going to hear about that movie. And like, it's legitimately trying to find ways to leverage my platform and leverage the big movies people want to hear me talk about to say, also, these things are out there too. Please check them out so we can get more of those too.
Very smart man. Very smart man. That's a great way to get some attention to films that people otherwise wouldn't have known about, wouldn't have recognized. That's actually when I first started Guy at the Movies back in, 2019 at this point. That was one of my focuses. It was on, you know, not only the blockbusters, but I wanted to draw attention to some of the other films that people might not be talking about. Yeah. And quickly found that festivals were a great location to identify those. But also, you know, you get this as well. I'm 100% sure the emails every day about different types of films that, you know, we may never even see released wide. They might go straight to digital. But you know, sometimes there's some gems in there that you really want to share with people.
And it's one of the things that makes the world of the current version of film discourse so tricky, and everyone feels this, that because it's a click-based version of how things grow and monetize all of that, what do people click on? That's what you cover more. And because of that, you hide all the other stuff. And everyone wants to cover that other stuff more. Everyone is more interested in talking about something besides the most obvious thing to talk about.